5 years ago today, the Carment rail disaster claimed the lives of 3 people. And it's worth perhaps digging in and reminding ourselves a little bit about what went wrong that day and see how we've learned those lessons and how others are maybe learning or not learning those lessons. A quick content warning, this video will of course contain descriptions and images from rail crashes. But what exactly happened? Let's just very briefly remind ourselves exactly what happened to cause this derailment. First of all, there was a badly installed drainage system. As-built, the records of that installation were not produced. The asset, or what was built, was not then recorded correctly, added to asset management systems, and then inspected as a result. So there was no, the railway had no idea what the condition of this drainage asset was, the fact that it had been built not just badly, but dangerously. Then climate change, increasing the number of extreme weather events, is a major broad factor, but on this particular day we had an extreme weather event, or multiple events across the whole of Scotland, indeed the whole of the UK, resulting in a loss of situational awareness at the Railway Control Centre in Scotland. Combined with that, we had heavy localised rainfall focused by this poor drainage system, one element of the drainage system, a bund that had been built that had not been part of the design, which then washed out a poorly installed other part of the drainage system, washing the material from that drainage system out onto the railway and fouling the tracks. Because of the loss of situational awareness, a train was sent at speed with passengers on board along the line, collided with the debris, and the age and lack of modern crashworthiness features of this train then worsened the resulting derailment. You can see the offending washout from the drainage system here. The Rail Accident Investigation Branch put a lot of work into understanding exactly what the root cause was, exactly what happened that day, and they detailed this in an absolutely invaluable report that we went through in great detail through a series of episodes for long ago in Rail Natter. So do catch up with that if you want to see, really dive into the detail and go through this page by page and recommendation by recommendation. But the recommendations of the report there were 20 of them, and we're going to very briefly go through them because it's important for us to remember what the report recommended and then for us to understand, was this acted upon? So the first was telling the rail industry that it needed to ensure far better compliance with what are called the CDM regulations. So that is assuring that a project, a bit of work has been designed and built properly, that the relationships between the client, the contractor, and the consultant designer, the client, contractor, and the designer is appropriate to make sure that what is built is correct and that it is registered and understood and as-built are recorded and so on. There is a requirement for the Railway Network Rail to register all to make sure that all of the Scottish infrastructure assets, earthworks, drainage, anything newly built had been registered, given that this was an example where that had not happened. The third recommendation was to improve the design of drainage systems, to make sure that drainage systems better took account of climate change and other factors to ensure that the washout of a drainage system like this didn't happen again. Fourth recommendation was a review of earthwork examination approaches. A fifth was to clarify the standard around earthwork examination and ensure that that where examinations were incomplete, that this was recorded. A better assessment of infrastructure risk to drainage and earthworks from extreme rainfall. Improving extreme weather decision making and kind of central control from an operations perspective. Ensuring that the right people and processes are in place to actually assure, safety critical management, so that the people process in place could correctly deal with extreme weather events and kind of emergency situations. Key recommendation 9, which was for the industry to prevent the loss of safety critical knowledge during business change, things like reorganizations, new processes. Recommendation 10 was to improve the responses to infrastructure from risky rainfall. So where you have a heavy rainfall event, to actually improve the response to that in relation to earthworks and drainage. Recommendation 11 was a better and more robust process for actually understanding when a train is a route-proving train, so the first train back out on a bit of infrastructure that's been hit by an extreme weather event, and managing risk associated with that. Recommendation 12 is to develop a long-term strategy for derailment mitigation, and recommendation 13 to clarify the requirements for guardrails, curbs, derailment mitigation. So if a train's come off, then keeping that train in line, understanding and basically making the standards, actually go into some detail about how that is, rather than, they're there already, we'll put them again in the future. The next series of recommendations were specifically related to the train itself, the HST, the aging, now 50-year-old design of train that was involved in this crash. So recommendation 14 was to enhance the strength of lifeguards in front of the wheels. Recommendation 15 was to improve the safety of train windows when they're broken. Recommendation 16, to improve the safety of the folding tables within the ScotRail HSTs. Recommendation 17, to look at driver impact protection, particularly from secondary impacts. So not the train hitting someone, but then the driver hitting things within the cab. Recommendation 18 was a key one, was to tackle the significant corrosion on Mark III coaches. These very old coaches now have been in service for a very long time, tackling the corrosion on those. Recommendation 19, pretty fundamentally, was to give a timeline for the withdrawal of the HSTs and manage risks with their continued operation accordingly. And then recommendation 20 was about the risk of and from battery fires, a kind of an emerging risk that is not fully understood, while the RAIB recommended that this was better understood. So they're the recommendations, and there have been at least one, if not two, subsequent events that have drawn one of the key recommendations into the fresh eye, which is there's a collision between a kind of a train and a big fallen tree at Broughty Ferry near Dundee. And this, the recommendation within this report was pushed on 19 from the Carment report, which was to give a timeline for the withdrawal of these trains, because they, particularly at the cab end, they are not providing the level of safety that other, rolling stock, not even new rolling stock, but even kind of relatively old comparative rolling stock, providing much better protection. So this is a key recommendation that was emphasised in subsequent crashes. The key question, though, is what has been done off the back of these recommendations, and actually there's a lot of positives. A huge amount of work has been done by Network Rail, particularly to resolve a lot of the recommendations about operations and about earthworks and drainage design and management. 5 years on, and the RMT union is not so sure that enough has been done, though. They have come out quite robustly saying that they're disappointed with the lack of progress on several of the recommendations. The RMT union, representing thousands of rail industry staff, as well as one of the conductors who died on the train, they're quite clear that not enough has been done. They reference the fact the RAIB annual report from last year, which was published this year, lays out where recommendations have not been closed, where there are still open recommendations. And so of these, we can go through. The recommendations that are still open is registering all Scottish infrastructure assets, improving the design of drainage systems, improving extreme weather decision-making, better assurance of safety critical management, improving responses to infrastructure rainfall risk, developing a long-term strategy for derailment mitigation, tackling the corrosion on Mark III coaches, and giving a timeline for the withdrawal of HSTs. All of these remain open, unresolved, and the RMT is pretty unhappy about this. In response, the RAIB clarified that a lot of work has been undertaken and progress made in closing the recommendations in the intervening years. However, 8 remain open, indicating that there is still work to do. The tragedy of Carment should never happen, but it is an opportunity for us to ensure that it doesn't happen again. There is so much for us to learn about the way that climate change is increasingly impacting our railways, resulting in stressing an asset that's not been invested in over the long term, even if we've made huge leaps and bounds in drainage and earthworks assets in the intervening years. But what's also interesting is to think about how this learning has perhaps been shared beyond the UK to the rest of the world, because only very recently, during July, there was an incredibly similar derailment in Germany, in southern Germany, which resulted in the deaths of 3 people. This derailment as a result of a washed out sewage system, so a piece of installed infrastructure that had been that was an extreme rainfall event led to the sewage pipe overflowing, washing out material onto the track and derailing the train. This is obviously investigations into this crash are absolutely still ongoing, but we can see that there are a lot of parallels, and I look forward to reading the report from that crash and understanding how many parallels there are with Carment. But you have to ask how much has been learned internationally from this disaster. And indeed, the questions are coming through from across Germany of, how can our railways, Germany asking, how can our railways become more climate resilient? Exactly the same questions that were being asked after Carment. And are the responses adequate? Well, time will tell, but we do not want to see more and more repeats of similar accidents as our railways across Europe and beyond are battered with an increasingly violent climate. What we want to do is learn from the derailments in Carment and at Rieglingen, and ideally avoid them happening again. And that's not just in the direct, how do we stop a train derailing, but it's all the broader systems, whether it's operations, whether it's our regulations, our standards, or whether it is in the way that we invest in and manage the infrastructure.